Hi guys, welcome back to Mer Murder, where we put the Mer in murder. I'm your host, Mercedes Rose, and I'm so grateful that you guys are here for another week with me. I thank you guys so much for your support, and let's get into the show. So this week we are headed to the West Coast, to the infamous City of Angels, Los Angeles, California. To those a part of the true crime community, we know LA for a lot more than just palm trees and good vibes. The same streets that are walked by celebrities, influencers, and people you are just dying to meet one day are also being walked by the same people you'd actually die from if you cross paths with them. During the 70s and 80s, LA alone had 20 serial killers simultaneously active and was dubbed the U.S. serial killer capital. And today we will be talking about one of the most prolific serial killers in LA around that time, labeled by the LAPD as the Grim Sleeper, a name given to him due to his apparent 14-year hiatus from serial killing, only to return to the streets of Los Angeles to torment the local women for a second time around. Los Angeles, California was cementing itself as the best city to be in during the 80s and 90s. If you wanted to be somebody someday, LA was the place you needed to be. But behind the smoke and mirrors laid a much more grim reality. The streets of LA were riddled with crime and drugs, and the homelessness epidemic began to soar during this time. LA became filled with people who ended up facing hardships in the wrong crowds, often strung out on drugs and involved with extremely dangerous activities. With so much crime and violence in the streets, it became challenging to identify senseless acts of violence from organized ones. And unfortunately, LA became the perfect place for a serial killer to thrive. On August 10, 1985, a South LA man went on a walk along with his dog to start off his day. He ducked into an alley off of West Gage Avenue, and this path would take him from an ordinary stroll with his dog to a life-altering and traumatic moment as he stumbled upon the body of 29-year-old Deborah Renette Jackson. Deborah was found lying on the dirt path next to a fence. Covered with a red carpet, her purse lay next to her head, and her decomposing arms stuck out from underneath the carpet and laid propped up against the fence. The man immediately called police to the scene, and as officers investigated, they discovered Deborah suffered 3 gunshot wounds to the chest. It appeared to investigators that Deborah's body was left in the alley, undiscovered, for several days, so they assumed someone must be out there looking for her if she had been there for a while. They went through her belongings to try to identify her, and they came across a phone number which they called. On the other end was a woman who claimed to be Deborah's ex-girlfriend. She confirmed Deborah's identity and said she was actually expecting to see her earlier because Deborah had to come to her place to pick up the rest of her belongings, but she never showed up. The detectives tried their best to try to figure out what exactly occurred at the time of Deborah's death. They interviewed her friends and family, who explained to them that Deborah was a hard-working woman and a very kind woman. They revealed to investigators that Deborah was trying to turn her life around and regain custody of her 3 children after becoming impoverished and addicted to drugs. After the interviews, the autopsy came back and her death was obviously ruled a homicide due to 3 .25 caliber gunshot wounds. However, the medical examiner revealed that there was more than just bullets in her body. There was also cocaine present in Deborah's system. Investigators couldn't figure out what led to Deborah's murder, however. The only evidence they had were the 3 bullets found in her body. It wasn't unusual around this time in LA to see crimes against homeless people and drug users. The streets were filled with chaos and crime. Investigators could not determine if this was a drug deal gone wrong, as they usually see, or maybe Deborah owed a debt that she couldn't repay. Regardless, Deborah's case began to grow more and more cold as the leads went nowhere, and eventually her case was among many others waiting for justice. The murder of women in South Central LA became more common due to the crack epidemic. People would do anything to get their hands on their next fix, and police began to notice a pattern. Many of the murdered women in South LA were Black women, who seemed to be having a hard time turning to drugs and prostitution. At the time of their deaths, they were usually strangled and stuffed in garbage cans or dumped in alleys. The LAPD knew they had a serial killer on their hands, and they dubbed him the South Side Slayer. But they kept their information about the murders very secret, causing distrust between them and the public because from the outside looking in, it seemed that the LAPD wasn't doing enough and Black women were going to continue to be murdered because of it. The public put immense pressure on the LAPD to find the serial killer. One major figure in this fight was Margaret Prescott. Margaret formed the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders, and her group's demand for justice led to a task force being created and sent out by the LAPD to try to find the, quote, South Side Slayer. A year later, almost to the day, on August 12th of 1986, another grim discovery was made. In an alley off of West Vernon Avenue in Hyde Park, LA, The body of 35-year-old Henrietta Wright was found wrapped in a blanket with an old dirty mattress placed on top of her body in order to hide it. Henrietta was faced with many hardships throughout her life. She was a single mother of 5. She struggled to find a good-paying job, having to work 2 jobs, sometimes as a cafeteria employee during the day and a cocktail waitress at night. Unfortunately, Henrietta lost her home in a devastating fire, and this led to her becoming homeless, and she hopped around South LA with her 5 children from hotel to hotel. The stress from losing her home and financial hardships sent her into a downward spiral. Henrietta sought comfort in crack cocaine to feel some sort of release or ease from the struggle she was facing, but this would take her down a dark and deadly path of addiction. Henrietta became the perfect victim for the Southside Slayer, the person who seemed to be murdering struggling women down on their luck, and unfortunately, she became one of them. Henrietta was found with 2 gunshot wounds to her chest, a piece of a men's shirt stuffed in her mouth as a sort of gag, and she was partially nude. There were obvious signs of trauma and a struggle, as there was a concerning amount of blood surrounding her mouth. Officers never found shell casings at the scene, and to them it looked as if Henrietta was actually murdered in another location and then dumped in this alley. After speaking with her friends and family and learning about her struggles and drug addiction, it was clear to them that Henrietta was another victim of a serial killer. But for some reason, they decided to separate Henrietta and Deborah's cases from the Southside Slayer cases, because these 2 women were shot and not strangled, which was the usual MO in the serial killings around South LA. On January 10, 1987, the search for the South LA serial killer got a new lead in the case, with not only another unfortunate murder, but an eyewitness account of details that could possibly help detectives find the murderer. A man who wished to remain anonymous to the 911 operator called and reported a murder on the 1300 block of East 56th Street in central Alameda, LA. The man said there was the body of a woman in the alley and that he saw her being dumped by a man who drove off in a white and blue Dodge van. When officers arrived, they found the body of another black woman, 23-year-old Barbara Bethune Ware. Barbara was found near a car's removed gas tank. The top half of her body was covered in a large black garbage bag, and like the 2 previous victims, she was shot once in the chest. Detectives feared that the man who reported the murder but insisted on staying anonymous was actually the serial killer himself, because they tracked down this white and blue Dodge van and found it about 5 miles from the crime scene in a church parking lot. They were informed that the van belonged to the church, and after interviewing all of the church officials, they found themselves at a dead end once again, as no leads came from any of this. Detectives concluded that the actual serial killer made the call and pinned the discarding of the body on a passing church van to cover his tracks. Upon informing the family of their loss and conducting an autopsy, it was revealed that Barbara was shot with a .25 caliber gun, and the bullets pulled from her wounds were compared to those found in Deborah and Henrietta's bodies. They could confirm that those bullets were all shot from the same .25 caliber gun. But again, detectives would decide that these 3 murders were not a part of the Southside Slayer killings, because all 3 women were again shot and not strangled. So, police formed a different, smaller task force in efforts to try to find what they believed was another serial killer. They did not inform the public of this murder, an apparent second serial killer, and this silence allowed the serial killer to continue on and take the lives of 4 more black women. Bernita Rochelle Sparks was found dead on April 15, 1987. Bernita was 26 years old and found stuffed in a garbage bin off the 9400 block of Southwestern Avenue in Gramercy Park, LA. Bernita appeared to have been strangled, beaten, and ultimately fatally shot once in the chest. In the same year, just 6 months later, on October 31st, what was supposed to be a normal, spooky Halloween filled with festivities was turned into a real-life nightmare, as the body of Mary Catherine Lowe was found in an alley off the 8900 block of Western Avenue in Gramercy Park, LA, just 3 blocks away, not even a 10-minute walk from where Bernita Sparks' body was found. Mary, like Bernita, was also 26 years old, and she was actually on her way to a Halloween party, but she never returned home. Mary was also found with a gunshot wound to the chest, resulting in her death. Her body laid covered and hidden in the alley after being shot. 3 months later, on January 30th, 1988, 22-year-old Lucretia Denise Jefferson was found dead in an alley off the 2000 block of West 102nd Place in Westmont, LA. Like other victims, she was shot multiple times in the chest, and her body was hidden and covered by a discarded mattress. Later that year, on September 11th, the body of Alicia Monique Alexander was found, like some of the other women, in an alley off of the 1700 block of West 43rd Place in Western Avenue in Vermont Square, LA. Alicia is our youngest victim yet, at just 18 years old, and like some of our other victims, she was found hidden under a mattress, nude, and she suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. Alicia was simply just on her way to the store when she never returned home, and her family was informed of her unfortunate murder. Now, I know I must sound like a broken record, but imagine how the locals, especially the women of South LA, felt during this time, especially women in the Manchester Square neighborhood. All of our victims are found within a 2.5-mile radius within this neighborhood. Imagine within the span of about 3 years, you hear about the murders of 7 young women just in your neighborhood alone, all shot to death and some even sexually assaulted. And not only are women being murdered, but it's happening more and more frequently as time goes on without this man being captured. Law enforcement also began to feel the pressure as more and more bodies turned up in South LA, and they had no choice but to accept that there was another quote-unquote serial killer on their hands. They dubbed the murders the 25 caliber killings, but as soon as the murders began to grow more frequent, they suddenly stopped altogether. Detectives weren't sure what exactly led their serial killer's succession of the murders, but with no more movement in the case, no more evidence, and no more actions from the killer, the investigation eventually runs cold. During the early 2000s, the city of Los Angeles began to turn things around in its communities. More task forces were put around neighborhoods to prevent gang violence and other violent crimes, and there was a significant decrease in crimes throughout LA, especially as the crack epidemic began to slow down. This gave detectives more time to reopen cold cases and try to gain justice for the victims who have yet to be given it. This included the victims of the 25 caliber murders. Around this time, DNA analysis also became a lot more developed, and the state of California had a database, a part of CODIS. And if you aren't familiar with CODIS, it stands for Combined DNA Index System. It is the FBI's national DNA database system, which links DNA collected from forensic labs all across the country to one system, allowing investigators to compare DNA collected from other violent crime cases. CODIS has helped solve over 750,000 cases and continues to help bring justice to more to this day. On November 2nd of 2004, Proposition 69 was passed in California, which allowed California to collect DNA from all convicted felons and individuals arrested for felony and some misdemeanor crimes. This new law allowed for the collection of many more DNA samples and would help investigators of the 25 caliber killings to make a great break in their case. Upon comparing DNA from the database to that of the unidentified male suspect in the 25 caliber killings, a match was made from the DNA found at the scene of a more recent murder that occurred in 2003. Valeria Louise McCorvey was found murdered on July 11, 2003. Her body was found in an alley on Denker Avenue in Westmont, LA. DNA analysis and autopsy findings show that she was strangled and violently sexually assaulted before her death. Valerie was a mother who struggled with substance abuse, but according to her family, she was on her journey to getting clean. Unfortunately, that journey came to an unfortunate end upon her gruesome and untimely demise. Not only did DNA collected from Valerie's murder match the DNA from the male suspect of the 25 caliber killings, but it matched another case as well. Just a year prior, on March 9, 2002, the nude body of our youngest victim, 15-year-old Princess Cheyenne Bartholomew, was found brutally beaten and strangled in an alley in Inglewood. Princess was a young girl who was all too familiar with abuse and suffering. She was abandoned by her mother not too long after being born and left in her father's care. Unfortunately, her father was not fit to be a parent, and at the age of 3, Princess was removed from her home and put into foster care after she was found overdosing on cocaine, severely malnourished, and covered in bruises and cigarette burns. Her father was sentenced to 4 years in prison for the abuse, and Princess now had no connection to any real family. Eventually, she found a caring and loving home hosted by the Smart family, and she was taken very well care of until around 1997 when her beloved foster mother unfortunately passed away, and sadly, not too long after, her foster father fell ill, becoming unable to care and support his foster children. Princess was once again placed into foster care and bounced from home to home, unable to find the peace she once had. She ran away from every foster home she was housed at and eventually turned to a life on the streets when she was connected with a pimp in Hawthorne, LA. The last time her last foster family ever saw her was December 21st of 2001. For years, investigators searched for their unidentified killer across all databases and worked tirelessly to keep the women of LA safe. But unfortunately, the man they were looking for was working much harder. On January 1st, 2007, the body of 25-year-old Janicia Lavette Peters was found on the 9500 block of Western Avenue in Gramercy Park, LA. Janicia was a young mother who had previous struggles with drug addiction but was working towards a better life for her and her son. She had recently enrolled at a local school to study computer science before her untimely death. Janicia was found stuffed in a garbage bag in a dumpster. She suffered from a single gunshot wound to the back, but she miraculously survived the shot. Unfortunately, however, her killer continued to dispose of her body in the garbage bag and zip-tied it shut, leaving Janicia to suffocate and die in the dumpster alone. Following Janicia's death, investigators couldn't help but notice how close her body was to where previous victims, Bernita Sparks, was found. Both ladies were found in dumpsters off the 95th block of Southwestern Avenue in Gramercy Park. In fact, after mapping out the locations of all the victims from the 80s in relation to the victims of the 2000s, investigators concluded that their suspect must be from or still resides in this area. Investigators decided that although the MO seemed to have changed in some cases from shootings to strangulations, DNA proves that these crimes were committed by the same man from the 80s, and it appears that he may have taken a 14-year hiatus from his serial killing spree. Nevertheless, their serial killer was once again active and terrorizing the streets of LA. And it wouldn't take long for the public to find out after an inside source from the LA coroner gave LA Weekly reporter Christine Pelisek the tip that a serial killer from the 80s was active in the streets of LA once again. After some research, Christine released an article in August of 2008 telling the public that a serial killer was active, and it was her who coined the name the Grim Sleeper, after finding out he was inactive for 14 years before returning to his crime spree. This lit a fire under the LAPD, who was once again in the hot seat for having known the women of the city were in danger but not warning their community. However, their investigation seemed to keep hitting dead ends, and they really had no new information to share with the public. And ultimately, they had no choice but to start from the beginning. They decided to go back through all the files from the previous murders in the 80s, and this decision would prove to be their best one yet, as it led them right to our killer's one and only known survivor, and it was her statement and cooperation that would help push this case in the right direction. Anitra Margette Washington was 30 years old when she crossed paths with our serial killer. It was a cool Sunday night on November 20th, 1988, when Anitra was on her way to her friend's house to hang out. During her walk, she noticed a car which she thought, in her words, was cool, and at the same time, the driver noticed her. He pulled over and offered Anitra a ride to her house. At first, Anitra declined the offer, but after some persistence from the man in the car, she thought it wouldn't be such a bad idea. After all, he did not come off threatening in the slightest. In fact, she thought he looked kind of geeky. She would later tell detectives that she thought he was a pretty nice guy. Sadly, that couldn't be further from the truth. Anitra got in the car, and everything seemed fine at first. Conversation was light, the man seemed normal, and they were on their way. But suddenly the man said he needed to stop at his uncle's house off of 81st Street to pick up some money. Anitra had no problem with this, as 81st Street was nearby and wouldn't take her anywhere she was unfamiliar with. But as they arrived and the man returned from the house, his demeanor changed. And before Anitra could even figure out what happened, she felt a sharp, burning sensation rip through her chest. She had just been shot. Flowing in and out of consciousness, Anitra tried her best to exit the vehicle, but sadly, she was unable to escape before she passed out again. On one occasion, when she regained consciousness, she noticed the man on top of her, sexually assaulting her. And then she was out again. When she awoke once more, she was met with a series of bright flashes in her face, what we now know to be photographs that the man was taking of her as he was assaulting her. During the photographs, Anitra mustered up enough strength to try to open the car door, but as she did, the man swung open the door for himself, and he threw her out of the car, leaving her for dead. Luckily, Anitra fought to stay alive, and after being shot and sexually assaulted, she found the strength to walk to her friend's house, where she was taken to the hospital. Upon her arrival, doctors and surgeons rushed to Anitra's aid. They were luckily able to locate the bullet that ricocheted off of her sternum, deterring the bullet from striking any of her vital organs. Anitra not only survived her attack, but was also well enough to speak with officers and give a detailed account of her attacker's appearance, his car, and even the house he stopped at before he assaulted her. Unfortunately, in the 80s, nothing came from this investigation for reasons unknown, but investigators in the 2000s were able to revisit Anitra and take her previous police sketch to the public. This would actually be the first time that the LAPD let the public in on their information and findings throughout this investigation. They even ran ads, put up billboards, and posters offering a $500,000 reward for anyone who might recognize the man from the sketch or have any information regarding any of the victims depicted on the flyer. The case was even discussed on the famous TV program America's Most Wanted, officially addressing the killer as the Grim Sleeper, and families of the current and previous victims found themselves looking at a TV screen with their deceased loved ones' pictures displayed among others, apparently part of a large group of young women who they are now finding out to be victims of a serial killer. The families immediately began calling the police station with information regarding their girls. The families gained newfound hope that there would soon come justice, as the $500,000 reward should surely bring about some new evidence for the case. Unfortunately, the money only brought about hundreds of bogus tips and people claiming they knew the man who was in the police sketch, sending investigators on dozens of wrong directions and ultimately back to where they started. Finally, in April of 2008, California allowed law enforcement to use familial DNA, which could be used to run DNA from certain cases against DNA in the system to find a partial match, usually from a family member of the suspect. LAPD detective Cliff Shepard, who had been part of the case since the very beginning, decided to call Richmond, California DNA lab to find a potential partial match to the DNA found in the Grim Sleeper case. After a couple years of testing and retesting with no matches, in July of 2010, detectives finally found a partial match to the DNA found in the Grim Sleeper murders. The DNA matched the DNA profile of a young man named Christopher Franklin. Christopher was a 20-year-old felon who was arrested and charged with unlawful possession of a firearm as well as drugs. These were felony offenses he pled guilty to, which required a swab of his DNA as part of his probation. Investigators knew immediately that Christopher was not their serial killer, as he was obviously too young to have committed the murders in the 80s, but DNA showed that the familial match had to come from a male family member of his. After comparing all possible suspects, investigators could wholeheartedly confirm the identity of their serial killer, the Grim Sleeper, as 57-year-old Lonnie David Franklin Jr. Not only was Lonnie the right age and physical description as a suspect from the 80s, but he was never incarcerated or out of the country during the murders. And to top it all off, Lonnie lived at 1728 West 81st Street, right in the center of Manchester Square, the suburb of Los Angeles, where all the bodies were found in the 80s, and the same house our survivor Anitra pointed out to the police when she recounted her attack. Investigators were stunned. They finally found the man who terrorized the streets of LA for over 20 years and took the lives of so many innocent and vulnerable young women. After some digging into Lonnie's background, they discovered that he was something like a wolf in sheep's clothing. He had a wife and 2 children, but also a dark past filled with violent crimes. One notable incident was actually against a young woman in Germany, and this is thought to be the catalyst to Lonnie's murders in the future. In 1975, Lonnie was dishonorably discharged from the U.S. Army after being imprisoned for 3 years following his part in the gang rape of a 17-year-old girl from Germany. Lonnie, along with 2 other servicemen, offered the young girl a ride home, which she accepted, but upon entering the car, they held a knife to her throat and kidnapped her, driving her to a field and repeatedly assaulting her. The young girl was actually able to outsmart Lonnie. She pretended to have feelings for him and asked for his phone numbers, which officers later used to identify him and charge him, as well as the other 2 rapists in the attack. It was later discovered during this investigation that photographs were taken of this victim during her assault, similar to how Lonnie did to his victims in future attacks. In 1989, Lonnie was also convicted of 2 charges of theft, 1 charge of misdemeanor assault, and 1 charge of battery. However, he only served time for 1 of the theft charges, and he never was required to submit any DNA because his offenses weren't serious enough. Lonnie Franklin was also a former sanitation worker for the city of Los Angeles, which would also explain how he knew the locations of the alleys and dumpsters so well, where many of his victims were found. A majority of the victims were found along his exact work route, and even just a few blocks from his own home. Investigators were sure this time that they had their guy, but they wanted to take every precaution and make sure they had concrete evidence before going in and arresting Lonnie. Lead detective Dennis Kilcoyne instructed every surveillance unit at the LAPD to monitor Lonnie Franklin 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until he discarded something, anything with his DNA on it, so they could use it to match the DNA from their supply. One evening, undercover police officers followed Lonnie to a local pizza parlor where he was celebrating a birthday party for one of his girlfriends and her family. With the help of the restaurant owner, one of the undercover officers posed as an employee of the pizza parlor and collected dishes, silverware, and pizza crusts from Lonnie, secretly collecting them in the back for DNA testing. Less than 3 days later, the DNA from off the slice of pizza Lonnie was eating came back as a perfect match to the DNA collected at all of the crime scenes. And on July 7, 2010, police surrounded Lonnie's home on 81st Street and arrested Lonnie Franklin Jr. You might be wondering what Lonnie's reaction was, being arrested for murder after 23 years of evading the police and getting away with his crimes. Well, Lonnie, according to officers, was as cool as a cucumber. When they informed him that he was being arrested for murder, Lonnie simply said, quote, "Murder? Okay," and went right with officers down to the station. Neighbors were stunned at the sight of the immense police presence and even more shocked to see that they were there for Lonnie. Upon his arrest, they explained to officers that they never felt uneasy or threatened by Lonnie. The complete opposite, in fact. He was known in the neighborhood as a kind and decent man, so it was surreal for them to find out that Lonnie was not only a murderer, but the grim sleeper himself. As investigators searched the Franklin residence, they found over 600 pieces of evidence. There was a handgun believed to be the same one used in the murders, multiple sets of handcuffs, and the most unsettling find was a case hidden behind a wall at Lonnie's home auto body shop. This hidden case consisted of over 1,000 explicit Polaroid photographs and hundreds of hours of footage of numerous young women, most of which seemed to have been taken while the victims were unconscious or unaware that they were even being photographed or filmed. Many of the photos and videos dated back as far as 30 years. Police even found the photographs from Anitra's encounter with Lonnie over 20 years ago. Upon this discovery, investigators feared that the women depicted may be more of Lonnie's victims, and these were his trophies from the day. Along with the photos and videos were numerous articles of women's clothing, pieces of jewelry, and dozens of driver's license and IDs, assumed to have belonged to some of the victims in the photographs. Following Lonnie's arrest, detectives began interrogating him in order to try to get insight into the man who terrorized the streets of Los Angeles for over 23 years, and why. One by one, detectives pulled out photographs of Lonnie's victims, starting with Janicia, his most recent and last known victim from January of 2007. They asked him if he recognized any of the young women in the photographs, and one by one, Lonnie denied ever knowing them, even after detectives told him that his DNA was found in their bodies at the time of their deaths. Eventually, Lonnie began to show his true colors, and he made disgusting remarks about the young women's appearances. At one point, he called Bernita Sparks, his victim from 1987, heavyset, and he chuckled. He even reiterated his statement to detectives, telling them he said, quote, "She looked fat." And when shown the photo of Henrietta Wright, his second known victim from 1986, he called her, quote, "butt ugly," and that he had no idea who she was. Lonnie was rude, disgusting, and arrogant throughout the interrogation, as if he was too good to even come in contact with these women, let alone touch any of them sexually. But detectives shut all his audacity down with one statement and stripped him of any power he thought he had when they revealed to him that this would all be over and that these young women would get the justice they deserve. Not just from the DNA evidence, but also from the testimony of one of his victims that he did not know actually survived her attack, Anitra Washington. The detective said, quote, "You know these girls, they can't talk," as he motioned to the table filled with photographs of young women. "But we got one that can." Lonnie became immediately anxious, requesting an attorney. Detectives knew it was already over for him, and so did he. After wrapping up the interrogation, Detective Cliff Shepard actually ran into Lonnie's wife. This was actually all a complete shock to her. And I know sometimes that seems really hard to believe when serial killers have a whole second life with a family and a devoted spouse, but people can really live two separate lives and even multiple. Detective Shepard even said himself it seemed that the two weren't even sleeping in the same bedroom while they were investigating the house. To them, it appeared that Lonnie had his own section of the house, so it's very possible that his wife, Sylvia Franklin, had no idea he was sneaking out at night and committing these heinous murders. Detectives felt that they should just leave her be, as she was already traumatized and embarrassed as it is. On July 7, 2010, the same day as his arrest, Lonnie Franklin Jr. was charged with 10 counts of murder, 1 count of kidnapping, and 1 count of attempted murder, and he was held without bail. However, if you remember from the search of Lonnie's house, there was thousands of photographs of women that were suspected to be more victims of Lonnie's. The LAPD wanted to get justice for as many women as they could before they could take him to trial for the 10 murders, so they tried identifying any more victims that they could. After numerous failed attempts at identifying the women in the photos and videos, the LAPD was able to identify 5 women out of the bunch, but they were still unable to locate the women and discover if they were alive or not. So on December 16th of 2010, the LAPD released 180 photos of women found in the photographs, in hopes that people would come forward and identify their loved one, or maybe even identify themselves. The grandfather of one of the young women in the photographs came forward to tell police that he actually knew who she was. The young woman was actually a 14-year-old Lawana Wilson, and when Lawana saw the photo, it immediately brought back repressed memories from when she was raped by Lonnie Franklin Jr. many, many years ago. Lawana said that was the day Lonnie brought her to his house, sexually assaulted her, and then threw her in the back of a U-Haul truck, where that very picture was taken. And being a little girl who didn't know how to handle the attack, Lawana kept her story to herself. And not knowing how to cope with her pain, she grew up and became addicted to drugs while battling with her mental health issues. Lawanna went down a path of drug addiction, homelessness, and sex work in order to feed her addiction, and during her time on the streets, Lawanna actually came across Lonnie for a second time. This time was unfortunately no different from the last, as Lonnie picked her up and raped her again. She knew he had to have been from this neighborhood if after all this time he was still around, but she had no way of alerting anyone who might know him. Now fast forward back to the present day in the investigation, Lawanna is explaining her encounters with Lonnie to her grandfather, and he presents her with the most sickening and shocking news that explains why Lonnie spared her life both times. Lonnie Franklin Jr. was actually Lawanna's cousin. Lawanna was absolutely disgusted by the news, as she had no idea who Lonnie even was, let alone that he was her cousin and related to her. But above all, she was grateful to still be alive and be able to see herself and so many other women get the justice that they deserved. By 2016, 53 women were identified in the photographs, but dozens more remained unidentified and unaccounted for to this day. 5 of these women were believed to be more murder victims of Lonnie's, and one of them was murdered during his alleged dormant 14-year period. However, the investigators could not find enough evidence to charge him with the 5 murders, and they did not want to complicate or delay the current case that they had already built against him. So the evidence they did have was presented during the sentence hearing to acknowledge the other possible victims of Lonnie Franklin Jr. The first young woman was 21-year-old Sharon Alicia Dismuke. Sharon was found dead in the men's bathroom of an abandoned gas station on January 15, 1984. She was gagged, beaten, and shot twice in the chest. The MO matched Lonnie's previous victims, and her death was just over a year before Lonnie's first official victim, Deborah Jackson. The second young woman was 28-year-old Inez Elizabeth Warren. Inez was found unconscious in an alley on August 15, 1988 in Gramercy Park, the same general location our victims were found. Unfortunately, Inez suffered a gunshot wound to the chest and passed away at a nearby hospital shortly after her arrival. Her death occurred just 7 months after Lucretia Jefferson's, Lonnie's 6th victim. Georgia Mae Thomas was 43 years old when she was allegedly murdered by Lonnie Franklin on December 28, 2000. Georgia Mae was beaten and shot twice in the chest before succumbing to her injuries, and her death occurred during the alleged dormant 14-year period where Lonnie was believed to take a break from his killings, but his fingerprints were found on the same exact weapon used to murder Georgia Mae back in 2000. The murder of Georgia Mae challenged the idea that Lonnie took a break from his crimes and maybe he was actually active for the entire 23 years. Ayala Marshall was 18 years old when she went missing on February 1, 2005. Ayala was last seen at a medical facility in Hawthorne, California, and her body has never been found. However, her school ID was found among the many IDs recovered from Lonnie's collection of trophies from his murders. And finally, our 5th suspected victim was 31-year-old Relania Adele Morris. Relania was last seen on the 9000 block of Southwestern Avenue in Gramercy Park, LA, on September 10, 2005. Relania or her remains have never been found to this day. But when police raided Lonnie Franklin's home, they found her Nevada driver's license and 2 sexually explicit photographs of her in his hidden stash. Investigators suspect that Lonnie successfully discarded of Relania's body after murdering her, and her suspected death occurred around the time Lonnie picked back up in his murderous habits. By February 16, 2016, the murder trial of Lonnie Franklin Jr. began, and it was going to be a huge feat for the prosecutors because this was their one and only chance to put this monster away. After decades of investigators dropping the ball in this case, they really had to prove to the jury that this was the right person and they were in fact finally getting justice for their victims. The courtroom gallery was filled with reporters, but mostly the families of the victims. They wanted to show everyone in LA, hell, even California, that these women were more than just their circumstances or photos on a board. They were real women who were really loved. If you guys remember, a lot of our victims were mothers, and many of their adult children showed up to face the man who stole someone so sacred from them and impacted their lives forever. The back of the courtroom was filled with emotion and sorrow, but the same couldn't be said for the front, as Lonnie Franklin sat through most of the hearings extremely stoic and disconnected. A few times he was even seen with a romance novel to read while he sat in court. But there was one specific day he could not ignore what was going on in court, and that was February 25th, 2016, when Anitra Washington took the stand. Anitra got on the stand to testify about the night Lonnie left her for dead after shooting and then sexually assaulting her. And with every statement, she looked Lonnie right in the eyes with no fear and pointed to him, yelling out, "That is the man who shot me." Anitra's bravery did not go unnoticed as the jury began deliberating on May 4th, 2016, and the very next day on May 5th, they found Lonnie Franklin Jr. guilty on all 10 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The families of the victims were overcome with a sense of relief and shared gratitude towards the jury for finally bringing their mothers, sisters, and daughters the justice they deserved. Just 4 weeks later, Lonnie's sentencing hearing began. With still no signs from his family, he was forced to sit in a room full of people who had nothing but hatred towards him and wanted to see the worst possible outcome for him. Day after day, each victim's family took the stand to speak up for their loved ones and get the pain they've been harboring for decades finally off their chests and direct it directly towards the man who was all to blame. It goes without saying that none of these impact statements were more impactful than others, as we can never compare them. But some would say that the most unexpected victim impact statement that was probably the most memorable and maybe a full circle moment for Lonnie was the one given by Ingrid, Lonnie's first ever victim, the young woman from Germany who he assaulted over 40 years ago. Ingrid traveled all the way from Germany with decades of strength and courage mustered up to confront the very man who traumatized her all those years ago, becoming a voice for not only her and the fellow survivors, but also the young women who did not survive their encounter with Lonnie. Finally, on June 6, 2016, Lonnie was sentenced to death by the Los Angeles County jury, and for the next 4 years, he sat on the San Quentin State Prison's death row, awaiting his execution. Unfortunately, Lonnie never got to meet his executioner because on March 28, 2020, Lonnie Franklin was found dead in his prison cell. There were no obvious signs of trauma to his body, and the prison never released an autopsy report after its completion, so it's not really known to the public what exactly was the cause of Lonnie Franklin's death. But nevertheless, he still got what was coming to him. And according to Diana Ware, the stepmother of our third victim, Barbara Ware, she made peace with his death, even though she wanted to see him suffer a little longer. Diana says, quote, "This is something that God did because he wants to give him the final verdict." I think all the victims and their families can take comfort that at least Lonnie died in a cold, empty, lonely cell, completely alone like he deserved. He did not deserve to be given a stage one last time or to be able to have any last final words, because that would have been entirely too much decency for such an indecent man. And with that comes the end of today's case on Lonnie Franklin Jr., also known as the Grim Sleeper. Before we get into the next part of our case, I want to take a moment for us to remember all of the victims from today's case. 21-year-old Sharon Alicia Dismuke, 29-year-old Deborah Renette Jackson, 35-year-old Henrietta Wright, 23-year-old Barbara Bethune-Ware, 26-year-old Bernita Rochelle Sparks, 26-year-old Mary Catherine Lowe, 22-year-old Lucretia Denise Jefferson, 28-year-old Inez Elizabeth Warren, 18-year-old Alicia Monique Alexander, 43-year-old Georgia Mae Thomas, 15-year-old Princess Cheyenne Bartholomew, 35-year-old Valerie Louise McCorvey, 18-year-old Ayala Marshall, 31-year-old Relinia Adele Morris, and finally 25-year-old Janicia Livette Peters. These women were all someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's mother, and they were ripped away from the people who loved them and cared for them way too soon. They were robbed of their futures and their ability to continue to try and turn their lives around. And it was not their fault that some of them became victims of the system or products of their environment. Everyone in life deserves a second chance, and we should all acknowledge the fact that all these women were fighting for that second chance until the very end. I hope they all have found peace and can see how truly cared for they were, even if it did not feel like it while they were alive. Okay, so we're in the next part of our case where we give our police/investigator rating as well as our judge and jury ratings. So for our police rating, we are giving them I wrote it down, you see, a C motherfucking minus. You want to know why? Because why the hell did it take you guys 25 years to find this freaking Looney Tune? I can understand and acknowledge that in the 80s, it was a very rough time to LA due to the crack epidemic. Guys, after reading these stories, it is so hard to have words and letters come out of my mouth. It's extremely hard. I'm so very sorry. But yeah, I can understand that the 80s was a very rough time for LA due to the crack epidemic. And even to this day, there's still parts of LA that look like they're going through it right now. But how many bodies did it take for you guys to really pay attention and at least warn the general public? Why did it take so many women losing their lives? And actually, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room and say that at least 70% of the reason, in my opinion, why the investigators dropped the ball so badly in this investigation is because the victims were Black women. I said it. You guys can't see me, but my hands are up. I said it. It can be seen in cases all around the world, not just the US. For some reason, cases surrounding women, especially women of color, are not taken as seriously as they should be. And let me drop some facts for you guys real quick if you don't believe me. Black women are 6 times more likely to be murdered than their white counterparts. In 2022, of the 271,493 girls and women who were reported missing, 97,924 of them, or 36% of them, were Black women and girls, which is even crazier when you find out that only 14% of the U.S. female population consist of Black women and girls. Make it make sense right now. And this is all from the Office of Justice Programs, because I don't want y'all to think I'm pulling statistics out my ass just like anybody. This is all from the Office of Justice Programs website, officeofjusticeprograms.gov. May I remind you. And that's crazy. And it's even crazier that this knowledge is so easily accessible, yet when Black women and little girls turn up missing and murdered, some police investigators do what they did in this case, and they keep it on the down low until it becomes too great to ignore. It should not have taken 15 women dying, okay? Anyone who truly cared to protect and serve would have made it a priority to protect an obviously at-risk group of women and girls. And if they already suspected a serial killer in the area, but he didn't match your MO, they should have still paid attention and warned the women of LA. Instead, they let over at least, and that's a big at least, 15, because we know damn well, allegedly, that this man took more than 15 lives. He had hundreds of photos and trophies and IDs from women that are not accounted for. And you're going to sit here in my face and tell me that he didn't kill them. Okay, let's move on. Anyway, you're being dumb. How can you not suspect that most or all of the women in these photos were victims? I wanted so badly to give you guys an F, but you did redeem yourselves because you had a good few bunch of officers. For example, Officer Cliff Shepard, those individual officers and investigators that really did try their best to continue with this case, keeping it alive and getting these women the justice they deserved. They get gold stars, and that's why your ranking went a little bit up. Instead of an F motherfucking minus, you got a C motherfucking minus. So be grateful. Be grateful. The judge and jury in this case, you're getting the obvious A+. There isn't much to say besides amazing job finding this man guilty, not taking a bunch of time to decide that verdict, and also giving the victims and the victims' families the opportunity to confront the monster who changed their lives forever, permanently scarred them for life. Thank you for giving them the opportunity to speak to that man and tell them how much they hate him. I feel that death was fine. Whether it was life or death, it would have been fine because regardless, Lonnie was suffering in prison where he belongs, and we can only hope that he is suffering in death as well. So life or death would have been fine. I was happy with both outcomes regardless. He died. LOL, bye. And yeah, those are our ratings. C motherfucking minus and A+. Congratulations to the jury for winning this case. Congratulations to the judge and jury for winning this case, winning the rankings of this case. Anyway, our sources for this week's case are aetv.com, cnn.com, da.lacounty.gov, laweekly.com, Monster Among Us, The Grim Sleeper, documentary on Tubi, mynewsla.com, ojp.gov, and wikipedia.org. I said that all in one breath, guys. Oh my God. Woo! Yeah, that's all I got for you guys. Thank you guys so much. Again, so much for tuning in and supporting me every single week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for giving me the platform to get our victims' stories highlighted and honor them in any way that we can. Again, I like to end it on a little bit more of a positive note. This is my normal personal self. I hope it doesn't come off as insensitive. I'm not like, woo, murder. Like, it's really the worst thing to talk about, but I take pride in being able to talk about it. And yeah, I'm just super grateful to be given this platform. I really love you guys so much for the support. Again, if you want to continue supporting this show, you can follow me on Instagram at Mer Murder, the TikTok at Mer and Mer, and the YouTube channel you can follow at Mer Murder. All the show links are in the bio of the show and the episode, each individual episode. Thank you guys so much for your support, and I can't wait to see you guys next week as we put more Mer and Murder. I love you. Bye.